I invite the Minister of Social Development and Poverty Reduction to lead the House in prayer or reflection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a poem chosen by my friend Brenda Gertner. It's written by John O'Donoghue from his Book of Blessings, and this blessing is directed, as he says it, for one who holds the power. May the gift of leadership awaken in you as a vocation, keeping you mindful of the providence that calls you to serve. As high over the mountains the eagle spreads its wings, may your perspective be larger than the view from the foothills. When the way is flat and dull in times of gray endurance, may your imagination continue to evoke horizons. When thirst burns in times of drought, may you be blessed to find the wells. May you have the wisdom to read time clearly and know when the seed of change will flourish. In your heart, may there be a sanctuary for the stillness where clarity is born. May your work be infused with passion and creativity and have the wisdom to balance compassion and challenge. May your soul find the graciousness to rise above the fester of small mediocrities. May your power never become a shell wherein your heart would silently atrophy. May you welcome your own vulnerability as the ground where healing and truth join. And may the integrity of your soul be your first ideal, the source that will guide and bless your work.
Introductions by members. Madam Clerk. Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I rise to make a withdrawal of my earlier comments, which led to the question of privilege raised by the third party.
Proceed. Done? Okay, thank you. Given that the House Leader has withdrawn his remarks, I think the issue is now resolved. Thank you. Madam Clerk.
Introduction of bills. Private members' time.
Committee chairs. Member for Vancouver-Langara.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As the MLA for Vancouver-Langara and in my role as the official opposition Shadow Minister for the Attorney General today, I want to raise a matter that is not only of great concern to our communities, but also indicative of the broader issue within our approach to public safety and youth engagement. In the wake of continued concerns about youth safety, gang recruitment, and the general well-being of students within our educational system, the role and presence of school liaison officers has never been more critical. Recent developments across British Columbia, from Victoria to Vancouver, have indicated a troubling trend towards the reduction or outright removal of school liaison officers from our schools. In Victoria, for example, the alarming increase in gang-related activities as reported by Victoria Police Chief Del Manick underscores a critical need for the proactive preventative measures that school liaison officers provide. The arrest of a suspected gang member targeting students for recruitment starkly illustrates the vacuum left by the absence of these police officers. Madam Speaker, we're not only talking about teenagers at the cusp of graduating from high school or young adults or youth. We're talking about children as young as 11 years old. It has been reported that most schools in the Greater Victoria area have students involved in these gang-affiliated trafficking schemes using students to sell drugs and vapes. Victoria Police arrested an alleged gang member just last month who was accused of recruiting kids in several parking lots that were adjacent to schools during a school day. Police Chief Del Manick is calling on the Victoria School Board to reinstate the school liaison police officer program, which he says helps steer youth away from joining gangs. And I would say, Madam Speaker, that as indicated by the Chair of the Victoria School Board, in the 4 months prior to, since the removal of school liaison officers in Victoria, the data shows that just in the first 4 months that there was an increase of crime involving youth reported in the region by 12%. When we saw this in Vancouver with Deputy Chief Fiona Wilson, she indicated that since 2017 there had been a continual decrease at schools, but that pattern had changed in 2022 when the schools were without school liaison officers, with calls overall increasing by 16%, violent crime increased by 19%, and assaults increased by 27%. Madam Speaker, this correlation is undeniable. In Vancouver, we've seen the reinstatement of the school liaison officer program. In response to community concerns, they made adjustments. I know that at my children's elementary school, this was the first exposure for my children and friends of their age. In terms of the school liaison officer coming to present and teach about road safety. These were the first examples of the relationship that is built up with members of our police force in Vancouver. Developing those relationships early on is an understanding and recognition of rules and laws and good citizenship. We can also learn from the partnership, the 50-year partnership between the Delta Police Department and Delta School District, which stands also as a testament to the invaluable role that school liaison officers play in our communities. We've seen through that program, where they serve 37 public and private independent schools from elementary to secondary, that work is rooted in education, prevention, and building positive relationships with youth. This proactive approach to community policing has contributed to making Delta one of the safest communities in the Lower Mainland. And I know, when talking to members of the police force there in Delta, that they've been able to develop those relationships, including with members of the Tsawwassen First Nation. And when a young person there had engaged in some graffiti-type activity at the local school, there was an early intervention. There was a teaching of responsibility and accountability. And that early path correction led to a better path for that young individual. We've seen that the decision by some school districts to cut school liaison officer programs has sparked significant community backlash, with rallies and public outcry calling for their reinstatement. Parents, educators, and police officers have united in their support for the program, highlighting the positive impact school liaison officers have had in fostering safe school environments and deterring youth from engaging in harmful activities. The evidence is clear. Where school liaison officers are present, school benefits from decreased crime rates, early intervention for at-risk youth, and a stronger, more positive relationship between students and law enforcement. Yet despite this, there exists a push, influenced by the anti-police sentiment in our province, to remove these vital resources from our schools. This movement is not only grounded in the reality of our community's needs, but rather in a broader, often more politicized discourse that fails to prioritize the safety and well-being of our students, our children. As we consider the future of youth and school environments, we must learn to question this and ask, despite the Premier's stance on policing, highlighted by his past actions and publications that have really undervalued the importance of public safety and law enforcement in our province. This harmful rhetoric around those serving on the front lines, those who risk their lives every day to keep us safe, coming from this government caucus in the past, has continued to fuel this dangerous anti-police mentality in British Columbia. We know the Premier has a long history of criticizing law enforcement officials and making misleading statements about women and men in uniform. In fact, the Premier wrote the book on how to sue the police, criticized police activities at the 2010 Olympics, and his anti-police activism has drawn sharp rebuke from the head of the Vancouver Police Union. We know that members of the government caucus were at that rally back in September 2023, where there was a speaker there that said, "Cops out of schools." It's this kind of sentiment that we have to rise above in this legislative chamber. We need to recognize our shared duty to protect and nurture the potential within each young person in our school system. I call on this government to confirm their commitment to our students' safety, their education, and the path forward, and to reinstate school liaison officer programs across our province. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Member. Recognizing the member for North Island.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And thank you to the member opposite for giving me the opportunity to respond to this important topic. No matter where you live in BC, many of us share common hopes for ourselves, our kids, and grandkids. And we all want to see our kids grow up to be happy, healthy, and with every opportunity available to them. In a society where our children are constantly bombarded with outside influences, it's imperative that we prioritize their safety and well-being. It's a challenge that requires a multifaceted approach, one that collaborates between various stakeholders and implementation of targeted support systems. Supports have to be in place to keep kids safe and away from gangs and crimes. This is not just a responsibility, it's a moral obligation that we must uphold as a community. We cannot turn our attention away from harsh realities that many of our children face every day. Every child deserves to grow up in a safe and nurturing environment, free from the threats and pressures of crime. But how do we combat that pervasive threat? The answer lies in collaboration and proactive measures. We expect school boards to work hand in hand with families, students, and often the local police departments to create a protective shield around our children. It is through a united front that we can effectively provide our youth with the support they need to thrive. As a former school trustee, I am keenly aware of how much care and knowledge it requires to make a decision based on specific requirements of a school district. In my riding of North Island, School District 72 has a school liaison officer from our local RCMP that works directly with school services, student services, and is the key and direct contact for other provincial support initiatives like Safer Schools. That's what works there, Madam Speaker. It's not our job as elected officials in this chamber to tell them that a system that's working should be changed. This model, our school districts can determine what resources in the schools and the strategies that RCMP and local police forces can implement when needed. My constituency is an example that just because a district doesn't have a specific liaison in every school, it does not mean there is no help or communication from the RCMP or local police when needed. We have to remember that school trustees were also elected by their communities, and it is their job to work closely with parents to meet the needs of children in their district. Collaboration is key in developing comprehensive strategies that can effectively deter crime, violence, or gang activity and provide our children with the supports they need to make positive choices. Like I mentioned, we must acknowledge that one size does not fit all in this circumstance. We know that supports look different in different communities, and we recognize that the needs and challenges of each community are unique. What works in one neighborhood may not be applicable to another. Therefore, it's crucial for our communities to tailor their approach to their specific needs, challenges, and demographics. There is no single approach that works for all students, but rather a number of strategies that must be adapted to suit the unique circumstances of each locale. That's why it's important for people to be making decisions locally. They have the best idea what their specific community needs. Local stakeholders are the true experts on the ground. They possess invaluable insights into the dynamics of their neighborhood and are best positioned to identify the most effective interventions into the lives of students. Empowering local decision makers ensures that resources are allocated where they are most needed and that solutions are tailored to address the root causes of student engagement in crime and gang involvement. By empowering local communities to take ownership of these, we can ensure that resources are allocated where they are needed and the interventions are culturally sensitive and responsive to the diverse needs of our youth. In conclusion, Madam Speaker, safeguarding our children requires a concerted effort from all sectors of society. It demands unwavering commitment, innovative thinking, and the willingness to adapt to the ever-evolving landscape of youth. Let's stand together to protect our children. Together we can build a future where every child has the opportunity to thrive, free from crime and violence, surrounded by the resources and the supports that work for them. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, member. Recognizing the member for Vancouver-Langara.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And just with the comments from the member opposite, we certainly have an agreement that our protection and nurturing of our children in our school systems are first and foremost in this Monday morning statement exchange here. But leadership, Madam Speaker, does start from the top, and that starts with the Premier. It starts with members of this government caucus. And as I said in my opening statement, I have deep concerns about the lack of respect that I see the track record of our Premier in terms of disrespect for law enforcement, disrespect for the rule of law, disrespect for how our whole systems are structured here in our province to support all British Columbians. And as we talk about this one example of the School Liaison Officer Program, there is accountability. There's accountability up through those local school districts, up to the Minister of Education here, and ultimately up to the Premier of our province. We recognize in the dialogue this anti-police mentality that we've seen, this harmful rhetoric that we've seen time and time again. That in the face of this, I have seen the Vancouver Police Department, for example, the leadership there, with their diversity and inclusivity initiatives on the ground, the relationships that they've made with Deputy Chief Fiona Wilson, for example, the changes to the program. I recognize what the member opposite has said. We need to ensure that we're listening to the voices of parents and families in communities. Absolutely. But those parents and voices in communities, including in Victoria and in Surrey, are very concerned about their young people, their children, the children who are being recruited by gang activity on school yards and facilities. That has to stop. We need to ensure that our children and young people are not misdirected and misguided, recruited to be tools of drug trafficking, vapes, and the like. This is the safety that we need for our children, the relationship that is so important. We recognize the role that the men and women in our police, law enforcement around our province do. We need to recognize and support that the anti-police sentiment, the cops out of schools rhetoric that held in Vancouver Art Gallery has to stop. We, as members of this Legislative Assembly, our Premier, members of the government, have to lead. They cannot be silent when we continue to hear these voices in our communities. I understand everyone has a right to freedom of speech, but we have to hold our school districts, the roles that we have with law enforcement in our province, accountable, and let them play the roles that they need to play, giving them the space and the support to do so. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, member. Recognizing the member for Peace River South.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. With the indulgence, seek leave to make an introduction.
Is leave granted? Aye.
Well, thank you, and I apologize for the interruption, but I'm also very honored. I have a special guest in the legislature today, hailing originally from Quebec. We have Victor Lefebvre with us, who's now going to University of Victoria, who is working as a Canadian rower, and if I understand correctly, is very elite and promising athlete, getting ready to compete to get onto the Canadian national rowing team. And as he mentioned to me, no better place in Canada to be doing that, obviously, than right here in Victoria because of the opportunities we have. So will the House please make Victor Lefebvre welcome here in Victoria into the House.
Recognizing the member for Langford, Wanda Fuca.
Thanks very much, Madam Speaker. And welcome to Victor, his friend Stephen McCaskill, who also goes to UVic and happens to be my CA, let me know that he was coming to the legislature. So welcome, Victor, and I hope you enjoy your time here. And I hope a great tour from the member opposite as well. It's a pleasure to be able to rise this morning and talk about the efforts of our government when it comes to supporting post-secondary students. We certainly recognize on this side of the House, and I think on all sides of the House, that these are real tough times for British Columbians, and especially for our post-secondary sector and for our students. And I'm proud to be a part of a government that has taken a lot of steps since 2017 to tackle the challenges being faced by post-secondary students, whether it's making it post-secondary more affordable, accessible, and relevant, because we know that the challenge before us is that we are going to have 75% of the 1 million job openings in BC over the next 10 years. 10 years is going to go by quickly, and it's so important that we as a government, strengthen our post-secondary system. It is one of our competitive advantages here in British Columbia. In a previous role, I often met with investors, and the number one thing we talked about was our talent, the people of British Columbia being our competitive advantage. So with 1 million job openings, 75% of them requiring some form of post-secondary education, it's now more important than ever for us to be able to recognize that as a government and provide the investments needed to support that. And I also want to take an opportunity to be able to acknowledge and give my thanks to all of the colleges, the universities, the staff and the students, the student unions, all of the different parts that make up the post-secondary system. Whether that's in the last little bit as the MLA, I have the opportunity to work with University of Victoria, Camosun College, Justice Institute of BC, and Royal Roads University, or now in my new role as the Parliamentary Secretary for International Credentials, where I'm looking forward to hitting the road over the next number of months to be able to really do a lot of listening and learning from post-secondary students and staff about the challenges that are out there, but also the opportunities that are before us here in British Columbia to, again, strengthen our post-secondary system. I'm really proud to be a part of a government that has taken a number of steps to be able to address the challenges put forward by a number of bodies, including the BC Federation of Students, that has asked this government since 2017 to step up and to make more investments in the post-secondary system. One of the areas that I want to start is student housing. We know that the previous government did not live up to its expectation when it came to building more student housing. In fact, it's quite embarrassing. There was about 100 units of housing being built in 16 long years. But I'm proud of the efforts that our government has taken to build well over 8,000 student housing beds. That is, again, those that have already been built or in the process of being built. The Premier was just in New Westminster last week announcing investments at Douglas College in New Westminster. I was just at UVic over the weekend and got a chance to see the incredible new housing that opened up on campus, over 600 beds, and we know that there needs to be more done. So that's why we've made our commitments in the last number of budgets towards reaching that goal of 12,000 student housing beds. In Budget 2020, we also announced the BC Access Grant as one of the ways to make post-secondary education and training more affordable and accessible. This was a substantive new investment in provincial needs-based post-secondary student grants, one of the largest in over 15 years. These grants support a wide range of education and training at BC's 25-plus post-secondary institutions. As of December 2023, more than 71,000 students have received over $129 million in funding since the new BC Access Grant was launched. And unlike most previous grants that had been introduced, the BC Access Grant supports those who need it most: low and middle income students, including students in programs under the 2 years and those studying part-time as well. Madam Speaker, another thing that our government did back in 2019 was remove interest on student loans. This was a big one for me as I was just wrapping up my post-secondary experience at UVic. And so the government in the last number of years has saved students millions of dollars in interest payments since cutting interest on student loans in 2019. And the government has also at the same time increased financial assistance available to students, whether there's single students or as well as students with dependents. Those are some of the actions that we've taken. We've also introduced a tuition limit policy. The limit policy had been in place since 2005 and had been extended to 2007 to include mandatory fees. And we've capped it at 2% to recognize the challenges being faced by post-secondary students. In April of 2019, our government also made the single biggest investment in open education resources and open textbooks of $3 million. And I know that the numbers that I have probably are a bit outdated, but there are over 330 textbooks that are now available and range from math, computer science, chemistry, business, skills, and technical subjects such as foundational trades courses, healthcare, tourism, hospitality, and adult basic education that are now free of cost. I remember going to UVic my first year and going to the bookstore, and that was after I already paid the tuition for the year, and leaving the bookstore thinking that, holy smokes, I may need to get a second job to be able to pay for all those books that the poli-sci professors wanted me to read back then. So I know that that's a big one for post-secondary students. I also just want to touch briefly on another really important change that our government brought in, and that was the tuition waiver program. The President of Student Experience, Vice President of Student Experience at Camosun College shared, and I quote, "Post-secondary education can be transformational for many students, opening the door with a tuition waiver program and providing a range of wraparound supports for students during their time at Camosun will help students succeed and thrive." I just had an opportunity to be able to meet with the presidents of all of the colleges across British Columbia, and really pleased to share that just at Camosun College alone, which is located around my community and will be located in my community very soon when our new post-secondary campus opens up in the West Shore, over 231 students at Camosun have accessed the program since its launch in 2017. Those are just a number of the steps that our government has taken. I'm looking forward to chatting more about them in the days and weeks ahead.
Thank you, member. Before I recognize the next member, I'm just going to remind members that member statements are to be nonpartisan, and I don't like to limit debate, but I would like you to keep that in mind as you make your statements this morning. Recognizing the member for Cariboo North.
Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker. It truly is a pleasure to rise and speak about the importance of post-secondary education. We all know students are the future of our province, and we must continue to support them in everywhere we can. In British Columbia today, we find ourselves at an impasse where the future of our economy and the well-being of our communities are linked to our ability to utilize the potential of our young citizens. These individuals filled with ambition and intellect are eager to contribute to our province's success, yet they face significant hurdles on their path to participating fully in our workforce as skilled laborers. The nature of this crisis is not about young people's unwillingness to work or the lack of talent, it's the barriers that they encounter that block their access to the necessary education and training that they need. British Columbia's world-class post-secondary institutions stand ready to build the next generation of skilled professionals. However, the conditions have to be right, and we are increasingly hearing from both domestic and international students who are concerned about being able to afford their education in British Columbia. The cost of living crisis is having a major impact on young people who are struggling to both study full-time and work part-time to make ends meet. Students are barely able to keep up with BC's record high rental rates across this province, as awful stories of students camping and living in vans on campus continue to be reported. Madam Speaker, I want to set the record straight. I've heard members opposite continue the rhetoric about the lack of student housing built when we were in government. And I want to clarify that over 9,000 units of student housing were built between 2001 and 2017. It nearly doubled the amount of student housing in this province. One only needs to go to Brock Commons, which I just recently did, which was the tallest mass timber building in the world at the time, with over 400 units across 18 stories. I was proud to be a part of that. Madam Speaker, for many, they see no future in British Columbia because they know barriers persist even after they've received advanced education. This cannot continue. Changes need to be made to make life more affordable and increase access to keep our future leaders here in British Columbia. We must ensure the correct investments are in place so there are enough seats and instructors for anyone to attend at a feasible cost. Currently, when an individual is looking to complete a trade such as carpentry, it can take nearly as long as 6 years to become certified. This is far too long and not a timeline these young people deserve. Creating accessible advanced education is not merely an investment in nursing schools or technical training centers. It's an investment in the very future of our province, ensuring a strong and diversified economy. The stories of students struggling under the weight of rising costs and inflation are not just antidotes, they are a loud call for change. Pursuing advanced education has become an extremely difficult endeavor for far too many, marked by financial strain and uncertainty about the future. And as we look to the future, I look for a province where every individual, regardless of their background, their financial circumstances, or where they live, can access the training and education they need to succeed in this province. Instead of that, we are now seeing young people in our province losing hope. BC colleges have experienced domestic enrollment declines over the last 3 years at more than twice the rate of international enrollment declines. It is crucial that government takes steps so that British Columbians can establish their futures here in British Columbia. Honourable Speaker, I'm confident in these young people. We just need to give them a chance.
Thank you, member. Recognizing the member for Langford-Wandafuca.
Thanks very much, Madam Speaker. My thanks to the member for Caribou North for her comments and for the work that she's certainly done in her community on this topic. We are definitely going to disagree on student housing. I think it was just a few months ago that Premier brought in some blocks and shared for the media and those paying attention what really the difference is when it comes to the building of student housing under our government, under the previous government, and I'll just leave it there. I'm particularly proud of the work that we've done. But I just want to comment on a number of the pieces that the member raised in the 2 minutes and 20 seconds that I've got left, and that is where we were previously and where we are now. We certainly acknowledge that in 2017 we took a number of steps to be able to strengthen our post-secondary system after a period of time under the previous government where we saw tuition fees more than double, where we saw funding for the sector slashed entirely, and we also saw the upfront student grant program eliminated. Again, that was the record of the previous government and one that we tried to rectify in the last 7 years that we've been sitting on this side of the House. I will share with the member that I agree with her optimism around the sector, especially as someone who is a recent consumer of the post-secondary education system. There's a lot going forward. And again, I want to recognize the work that has been happening in the Ministry of Post-Secondary Education around the Future Ready Action Plan and touch on a number of the investments that our government has made. I touched on it in the brief remarks that I had before I wrapped up, that we expanded the provincial tuition waiver program to all former youth in care, regardless of age, creating opportunities for approximately 50,000 people to pursue post-secondary education and skills training for free. That's a big deal. We supported Future Skills grant learners in over 11,300 seats for the fall 2023 semester, helping people access high-quality and relevant training opportunities, and that included in over 400 high-demand areas such as construction, technology, and clean energy. We funded over 3,000 more technology spaces. I think we're upwards of 7,000 to 8,000 new tech seats that we've added in our period since we formed government. We put forward $101 million to support expanding post-secondary education, training, and labour market opportunities for Indigenous peoples. We provided MyTax, a great company based here in British Columbia, with $50 million to support 10,000 paid internships in priority sectors. I could go on and on and on. I'm proud of the record that our government has had on post-secondary education, and I can't wait to what we can do. I can't wait for the more work that we can do in the sector in the years ahead. Thanks very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, member. Recognizing the member for Peace River South.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak on this Monday morning during this time. and especially talking about something that's so front and center right now in the province of British Columbia, and that's the fact that people are struggling. People are struggling right across the province in every corner with affordability, whether it's the price of gas, whether it's the price of food, whether it's the price of housing. When we look right across the province right now, people are struggling. And nothing's more apparent than right now what people are sharing with me in my region, which I would argue is for the entire province. It's the little extra things which are actually quite large. And that's things like carbon tax and what the effects that has on our home heating. Now, as we know, the federal government, not that long ago, I guess it would be maybe 6 months, it was before the winter, talked about removing carbon tax off of home heating, which on the surface was something I was very excited for, until I found out that it was only going to affect half of the country. It was only going to affect the eastern provinces, which when we looked at that, we thought, okay, obviously we need to change that. It needs to be something that is going to be treated fairly for all the people in Canada. So I was very proud of Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, who the premiers and the governments in those provinces of all political stripes, so it's not a political commentary on that, different premiers stood up and said, this isn't fair. We need to be removing carbon tax off of home heating for everybody in Canada, which was great to see. Except, of course, here in British Columbia, where we heard crickets and it was silent. And I can tell you that for people in a riding like mine, how frustrating that is. Last week, it was almost minus 35 again in Dawson Creek. So contrary to what people were seeing, and I think I was even sharing some of those pictures, that up until mid-February, we didn't have snow on the ground. It was quite nice, and unfortunately, we need more snow. We need the moisture, and I'm really worried about what we're going to have for the agricultural sector this year. But when it's minus 35, guess what? Those that are fortunate enough to be able to afford a house in the province of British Columbia right now, even though we have the most unaffordable housing in North America, those that are lucky enough don't have an option in my region, and I'd say in most of rural British Columbia, but to have a natural gas furnace. This is not an option, it's not a luxury, it's a necessity that people have some way to heat their homes. And guess what that is? It's a natural gas furnace. In some places, even here on Vancouver Island, for quite a while, we had oil. And as a government, we were really promoting get off of oil and move to natural gas. In fact, there were grants being given out by government. Please convert to natural gas. Here's a grant to do that. But now, we have not only the carbon tax, April 1st, we're hearing it's going to go up again. Government wants to raise it up to $165 a ton. When we talk about people right now who can't afford groceries, or they're having to choose between, do I pay my large natural gas bill that has a huge amount of carbon tax on it, or do I buy groceries? The amount of people that call me and say, you know what, I'm having to pick and choose every month what I'm doing. But if we're going to make life more affordable, look at those opportunities we have. Now, I wish that we had followed suit like the other provinces in the eastern seaboard after the federal announcement, right before the cold snap and winter started, because we can imagine the hundreds and hundreds, and in some cases thousands of dollars that would have been left in people's pockets to help them. When more than half of British Columbians are only $200 away from being able to make their monthly bill payments, nothing would hit home more than something like removing carbon tax off of home heating, which is at the discretion of this government. Look, we know that carbon tax is federally mandated. that we can't remove it here in British Columbia completely, otherwise the federal government steps in. So contrary to what some people are saying about removing carbon tax completely, we know that can't be done unless the federal government does. But there are aspects and portions of it that actually can, in British Columbia, be changed. And home heating on carbon tax is one of them. And I think it's paramount to remind people that this is not just the struggles of people in a home. I've got a bill that I shared here in the House last week where somebody who owned a small little mini mall of 6 small businesses, and their bill last month, $3,000, was the carbon tax portion. So you want to talk about also not just homes, but look at the impacts it would have to small businesses that are struggling. $3,000 in carbon tax for 2 months. These are opportunities that we have here in British Columbia that can be looked at. When we look at, again, putting money back into people's pockets, and this, to my point that I made a few moments ago, this is not a luxury. This is a necessity. People do not have a choice but to turn their thermostat up and their furnace on in the province of British Columbia, in most places, and I've heard even people who live down in the Lower Mainland here in North Vancouver. I had somebody mention to me that it is cheaper and easier to turn on my natural gas fireplace than it is to use my electric heat because it puts me into a 2-tier system, and I can't afford that, and every opportunity to save a little bit of money. But this government wants to penalize people for using natural gas and for trying to stay warm in the wintertime. So I look forward to the comments from the other member on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you, member. Recognizing the member for Richmond, Steveston.
Thank you, Speaker. Thank you. I'd like to recognize the privilege that I have to respond here on the traditional territories of the Algonquin-speaking people, the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations. We all know that climate change is real, and it's happening right now. We've seen the devastating effects of extreme weather events like wildfires, floods, droughts, heat domes that have threatened our health, our safety, and our livelihoods. We've also seen the rising costs of food, housing, and energy as global inflation and interest rates put pressure on our budgets. We all want to do our part to reduce pollution and protect our environment for future generations, but we also need a government that helps us with the cost of living and supports our economic recovery from the pandemic. That's why our government's been working hard to deliver affordable housing, lower childcare fees, ICBC rates, increase family benefits, and reduce hydro bills. We've made sure that a family with 2 kids earning $100,000 pays less provincial taxes today than in 2016. And I'm going to repeat that because I think it's been missed a few times. A family with 2 kids earning $100,000 pays less provincial taxes today than in 2016. We can't afford to ignore the climate crisis, and that's why we've maintained a price on pollution that's fair, effective, and put money back in people's pockets. Residents won't be fooled by cheap slogans. Cancelling the price on pollution would cost people more, not less. It would hurt our economy, our environment, and our future. It's a false dichotomy that we have to choose between the environment and the economy. We're delivering on a plan that grows our clean economy and doesn't leave anyone behind. We're helping families with costs while fighting pollution and creating jobs across the province. Our plan invests in clean energy, transit, electric vehicles, green infrastructure, and more, guided by Clean BC. Other folks sound like the last investors in Blockbuster, and they want to double down while willfully ignoring Netflix. The global economy is changing, and BC is now poised to take advantage of an unprecedented opportunity for creating economic benefit for all British Columbians, as well as addressing our society's social and environmental priorities. While other political parties want to turn their backs on our bright future, we're staying the course. Maybe they don't understand that climate change is real and caused by human activity. Maybe they don't understand that global economic trends and opportunities are coming our way. Or maybe they don't understand that without a healthy planet, we can't eat, we can't work, and we can't prosper. We understand that the cost of inaction far outweighs the cost of action by orders of magnitude that are nearly incomprehensible. The costs from fires, floods, and drought are rising every year as a result of climate change. We have to take action for our children and for our future, but we also need to make sure we're not leaving anyone behind. And when our province benefits from growing our clean economy, we all benefit. We're tackling everyday costs to make sure families have more in their pockets. An enhanced climate action credit means that most people get back more than they pay for climate action. Most people get back more than they pay for climate action. We're also reducing costs across the board by eliminating MSP, cutting ICBC premiums, keeping hydro rates low, free contraception, and so much more. The province is prioritizing investment in Clean BC projects to reduce pollution, drive clean tech innovation and jobs, and meet expanding global demand for low-carbon products in a net zero future. This investment means good jobs for people across the province and supporting our homegrown innovation to be the solution of choice around the world. Our province will not be stuck in the past. We are growing our economy at the same time that we're investing in our environment and our people. We're delivering on a future that works for everyone, not just a select few, because we're stronger together. Thank you.
Thank you, member. Recognizing the member for Peace River South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Appreciate the member standing up and speaking. I didn't hear the words carbon tax or support or help for people once in her rebuttal, but we'll take the non-answer as actually the answer that this government is not wanting to pursue supporting people. Now, Madam Speaker, when I talk about what I was saying, that this is not about one or the other. This is about actually trying to help people in the province of British Columbia. One of the things, if we're talking about trying to worry about climate change, and I wasn't going to go down this road, but Madam Speaker, contrary to what some people think, promoting liquefied natural gas out of the province of British Columbia and converting the opportunities that other countries are trying to build coal-fired power generation, and they can divert off of that to liquefied natural gas. When you have a province of British Columbia that has somewhere in the vicinity of 0.1% of global carbon emissions, the best thing we can be doing is actually helping other jurisdictions. Because I tell you right now, the air we breathe in British Columbia is not solely our air. It travels around the world. So when places in other countries are building coal power plants, we breathe that air. If we want to make a difference, that's a difference we can make. But Madam Speaker, the reason why this topic of carbon tax is so important for, again, people who don't have a choice is because this government and provincially and everybody's toting, let's switch to electric, let's switch to heat pumps. Heat pumps do not work as a sole source outside of places like the Lower Mainland. This is a business I've done. I've worked in it 25 years. You cannot use a heat pump if it gets down below minus 20-ish. Which means you need an alternative heat source, which is usually natural gas. But what does this government do? They increased from 7% to 12% of taxation if you want to have a fossil fuel burning appliance, penalizing the people who don't have an option. Madam Speaker, in rural British Columbia, where it does get cold, as I said, minus 20, minus 30, minus 40, those furnaces are a necessity to not just stay warm, but to stay alive. And to help people in an affordability crisis, this is an opportunity that we're passing by. Our agriculture sector, who delivers our food, who is struggling right now because they have to use all these increased costs like carbon tax, which is then having to be passed on or carried on into their grocery stores. We have huge opportunities to help people with affordability. Removing carbon tax off home heating is a very simple one that could have been done before this winter season. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, member. Recognizing the member for Surrey Cloverdale.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Now more than ever, with inflationary pressures on small business, we need to respond to the needs that they have. And before I move over, and I'm hoping my voice can manage to get through this, I'd like to speak about what our government has been able to do for small business over the past few years. Madam Speaker, when the pandemic hit British Columbia, our government was there for small business, and I'm pretty sure there's stories in other ridings across the province. And I'd like to highlight a few that of the small business stories that were there in Surrey Cloverdale, which I imagine will also apply to other areas across the province. When the COVID business grants were announced, there was an opportunity for accountants to assist small business with their application process. And I can tell you, Honourable Speaker, that the accountants that we had that were trained definitely made a difference for small businesses who were somewhat afraid of the bureaucratic nightmare of filling out applications. I know I've filled out a number of them, and it's not a business that I'm comfortable with. With these accountants in place, there was over $2 million provided to the small business owners in my riding. Some grants were as small as a few $1,000s that were delivered to some of the taxi owners. And there was also grants of tens of thousands of dollars to some restaurateurs who were attached to the tourism industry. But, Honourable Speaker, the grant that really got my eyebrows was a grant provided to the horse racing industry, of which in my riding there's a harness racing track. And Fraser Downs, through this grant, was able to keep the industry afloat at a time when they were struggling the most. This may not come across as significant to some, but the amount of jobs that were there that were affected were great. We're talking about 120 direct jobs, and some of those jobs are not the most highly skilled jobs that we have out there. They're wages that are being paid at sometimes at a minimum rate, but those people were kept working during that time, and the ancillary jobs of other places that were around there, whether or not that was the local veterinarians, the local feed places, and the other transportation people that were there. It was able to keep their season open at a time where owners were just simply shipping their horses down south, and so go the jobs. The COVID business grants were as significant to the small businesses and owners and employees as was the MSP eliminations in 2020. Now, in 2024, we see the employer health tax threshold change. This change comes from government hearing small businesses who are asking for assistance. Last spring, the Select Standing Committee on Finance and Government Services listened to various business organizations who had asked for the thresholds to be changed. The report on the Budget 2024 consultations recommended to the Finance Ministry to look at those thresholds for small businesses to address the impacts related to rising wages and inflation. Changes to the thresholds were identified, and recommendation from the committee to look at the thresholds has led to the recent changes. The 2024-25 budget has addressed what we heard and what changes were made. And Honourable Chair, I think it's important at this point, and there are members on the other side that sat on this committee, and it's important to say that, you know, out of the 375 presentations that were given to us, that we heard it loud and clear, and government heard it loud and clear, and the recommendations that were put forward were acted upon for those small businesses that were there. These changes are estimated to save businesses more than $100 million annually. Now we are supporting the success of small and mid-sized businesses by increasing the threshold for their employer health tax. We've heard from the calls from the business community to allow small and medium business to hire more before they have to pay the employer health tax. We're doubling the exemption on the threshold from $500,000 to $1 million, effective immediately. and payrolls, businesses with payrolls between 1 million and 1.5 million will continue to partially be exempt and will pay less. So what does this mean? 90% of businesses will now be exempt from the employer health tax, which is up from 85% under the current rules that were there. This additional 5% increase actually applies to over 9,000 businesses in BC. And as far as the other part of the exemption, where they reduce their tax that they're paying, and that is 2% of all businesses that are out there, which equates to another 4,100 businesses will see a reduced payroll tax bill. BC's EHT rate is at 1.95%, and it's tied to the lowest and now meeting the same exemption threshold as Ontario. Not-for-profit and charitable organizations will continue to benefit from higher exemption and the full rate threshold, as well as special rules for locations. Honourable Speaker, we're going to continue to support growing businesses while improving health care for all people in British Columbia. I have an exercise in math, and I do believe, if I'm going to speculate, the MLA for Caribou-Chilcotin is going to respond. So at this point, I'll let my voice have a rest, and if he wants to sharpen his pencil for my math, I look forward to his comments. Thank you, Honourable Speaker.
Thank you, member. Recognizing the member for Caribou-Chilcotin.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I hope to, demonstrate my concern really around access to programs that have been announced, and I want to demonstrate some of the pressure that I feel businesses are under today. I think we can all agree that the small businesses of British Columbia obviously play a crucial role in our economy and, of course, our communities. However, make no mistake about it, Madam Speaker, the businesses are paying higher costs than ever. This is a time of unprecedented challenges facing small business owners in British Columbia. Labour shortages, increased inflation are among many factors that have led to rapidly increasing costs of doing business in this province. We're not far removed from a pandemic that brought years of economic hardship to small businesses in all industries across this province. The tourism sector was particularly hard hit as the world came to a halt. Many small businesses are still recovering from these challenging times and yet are being forced to endure an endless blizzard of new taxes and costs just to keep their doors open. However, the concern I hear most when speaking with business owners, particularly in Caribou-Chilcotin, is the rise of crime that we are seeing across this province. This is a new challenge facing small business owners as violent crime has increased 40% since 2016. The sudden increase in break-ins, broken windows, and other property crimes is taking a toll on businesses in our cities and in our communities. This rise in crime did not magically happen overnight. It is largely as a result of the prolific offenders that continue to be released time and time again, only to terrorize and victimize even more innocent people and businesses. You can see the results in our downtown cores, with businesses forced to install fencing, shutters, and other security measures just to deter theft and vandalism in the cities. And in the cities, Madam Speaker, some employees are having to wear stab vests in fear of random assaults, and some shops no longer able to insure. Some are even having to close their doors. In Nanaimo, Madam Speaker, one business had their windows broken 7 times in 7 weeks. In Quesnel, 12 businesses have been the target of criminals in the last 2 months, some of them multiple times. In Williams Lake, businesses such as Walk Right Shoe Store have been the victim of repeat offenders, not being held to account for looting businesses. Last year, a survey asked 500 Metro Vancouver, Fraser Valley, Kelowna, Kamloops, Prince George, and Victoria businesses a simple question: how long can they continue to operate under the current levels of crime? And just under 50% of businesses responded with 2 years or less. The cost of increased security systems, replacing windows and broken doors, were the final nail in the coffin of affordability for many small businesses in British Columbia. Many have seen their dream of operating a small business fade away as crime costs run rampant. Restaurants and shops considered staples of their cities and towns have closed their doors, taking with them a small piece of the character of that community. In response, business improvement associations across this province have started their own programs to support businesses affected by increasing vandalism and crime, and have called on the province to do the same. However, in a fashion that has become all too familiar for British Columbians, the program rolled out was too little too late, with too much red tape. 3 months in, the Securing Small Business Rebate Program has distributed a mere $71,000 of $10.5 million that was allotted. At this rate, only 3% of the funds will be distributed by January 31st deadline, and it will take 37 years for the entire $10.5 million to be given to small businesses. It's a devastating blow to the small business owners across this province, forced to bear the cost of a broken criminal justice system. Businesses across the province are facing constant theft, vandalism, and social chaos, now find themselves entangled in the bureaucratic red tape of a program that was supposed to provide relief. Entrepreneurs in BC are starting to lose hope. It's time to reduce costs, cut red tape, and deliver the support that these businesses so dearly deserve. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you, Member. Member for Surrey Cloverdale.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. And thank you to the member for Caribou-Chilcotin. I will agree that small businesses do play a critical part in our economy across the province. The part about math that I wanted to talk about started from a small business owner who had concerns over the raise to the minimum wage table that was out there. And while we all agree that everyone deserves a fair wage for a day's pay, for some small businesses, the increase that was coming forward that was based on the cost of living, 3.9%, was a little bit unnerving for this one small business owner. And so he came in, and what we realized that he had an annual payroll last year of over $800,000, and in 2023 paid just under $9,000 in EHCT. And with the increase of minimum wage, he was concerned about what was going to happen in 2024. And that's when we sat down and took a look at what was there with regards to his payroll coming up this year. So with this payroll now at $840,000 a year, and with the EHT threshold doubling, the business owner that I was speaking to directly realized that there was a cost savings of nearly $10,000 with the change of the threshold. So Honourable Speaker, in the words of this small business owner, this is a game changer to them. Shortly after the budget speech, Honourable Speaker, I met with my Chamber of Commerce, I met with my BIA Association, and to say that they were ecstatic over the threshold changes to the EHT would be an understatement. They felt in excess of 90% of their members that they represent in that area, which are small business owners, will finally get the ability to move themselves forward. I spoke to one small business owner that was sitting on the threshold of a $500,000 payroll. And now, knowing that the threshold had changed to $1 million, they knew that the added cost of that tax now being gone, the burden would no longer be with business. So, Honourable Speaker, I think what I'll leave is I'm happy with what the government has done recently to put the money back into the pockets of small businesses with changing the threshold of the EHT and what it plans to do with other small businesses and allow them to grow to the size that they feel that they can comfortably get to. Thank you, Honourable Speaker.
Thank you, Member. Acting Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I ask that the House consider proceeding with motion number 19, standing in the name of the member for Prince George Valemount.
Members, unanimous consent of the House is required to proceed to motion 19 without disturbing the priorities of the motions preceding it. Is leave granted? I recognize the member for Prince George Valemount to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And today I do move the following motion. Be it resolved that this House agrees that the government must do more to address the crisis in women's health care. I'm very glad to have the opportunity this morning to rise and make some comments about the issue that impacts millions of British Columbians, an issue that is essential that we discuss and yet is very often overlooked. We know that the healthcare system in our province is failing women. There is gender inequality in healthcare, Mr. Speaker, and there are wide gaps in research and treatment. And those gaps, Mr. Speaker, can mean major health issues. While our entire healthcare system is failing British Columbians, it is also true that women are more likely to struggle to receive the care they need when they need it. And there are countless examples across the province of how our system is failing women and gender-diverse people. Right now, for example, Mr. Speaker, BC Women's Hospital, the average wait time for the chronic pain and endometriosis program is currently 9 to 12 months. Additionally, a doctor's referral is required to enter the program, complicating matters for those who simply do not have access to a family doctor. Anyone knows that someone who has lived with endometriosis knows how long it takes to get a diagnosis, and that 12 months feels like an eternity when dealing with debilitating chronic pain. On top of that, Mr. Speaker, BC has the second worst discrepancy in pay between doctors who perform reproductive and urologic procedures on female patients at 61%. This is more than double the average pay gap. We have regularly heard horrific stories that women have faced in our medical system. We've heard the story of Sonia, who lost 3 liters of blood in the hallway of Langley Memorial Hospital while waiting for treatment following a miscarriage, or Allison, who was told to consider medically assisted death because she couldn't get access to cancer treatment, and of Jane, who had a heart attack months after being told that her cardiac symptoms were probably just anxiety-related. I want to focus for a moment on heart-related issues. Heart disease is the leading cause of death among Canadian women, killing 7 times as many women as breast cancer. In 2019, 20% more women in Canada died of heart failure than men, and 32% more women died of stroke. And yet, Mr. Speaker, 2/3 of participants in clinical trials on heart disease and stroke have been men. Misdiagnosis is a huge problem when it comes to heart-related issues with women, as they are much more likely to have symptoms dismissed or go unrecognized because they are so different than what presents in men. To quote Heart and Stroke, "For women's health to improve, the healthcare system needs to catch up to the fact that women's hearts are different and ensure that new knowledge about women and heart disease is translated into better prevention, diagnosis, and treatment." After all, Mr. Speaker, if we fail to study women, how can we possibly find optimal ways to treat or care for them? Did you know that the most common symptoms of a heart attack in women include discomfort in the neck, jaw, shoulder, upper back, or upper belly, shortness of breath, nausea, and vomiting? It's not what we've been taught to identify as the typical appearance of a heart attack, and it's why half of all women who experience heart attacks still have their symptoms go unrecognized, and they are less likely than men to receive treatments and medications in a timely way. That is why it is so incredibly important to have women represented in studies and in clinical trials, and why funding for research and education on women's heart health specifically is so critical. Mr. Speaker, we have to improve access to family doctors, to specialists, to imaging, and to treatment. We must invest in education and research that will ensure that women in British Columbia do not fall through the cracks. And Mr. Speaker, that is going to take exceptional leadership. And currently, this province is being failed by a government that is unwilling to take the lead. Women deserve high-quality health care, and they deserve it when and where they need it. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, the consequences are significant when that is not the case. And Mr. Speaker, I think there are very few British Columbians who would argue that they can get the health care when and where they need it today in our province. We can and we absolutely must do better for women in British Columbia.
Thank you, member. Member for Chilliwack-Kent.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I'm happy to rise and speak to this important topic and thank the member for their comments. I know that I hear from people all of the time about the impactful actions and investments our government is making in health to work to address inequities in the system and to promote gender equity. And I'm happy to canvass some of the most recent work. I'm going to start with HPV. Our government has taken real action to eliminate cervical cancer in BC. The human papillomavirus, or HPV, is a leading cause of cervical cancer, and early detection is crucial for treatment. As of January 29, 2024, individuals from 25 to 69 with the cervix can access cervical cancer screenings at home by ordering a kit to self-screen for HPV. Cervical cancer primarily affects cisgender women, as well as transgender men and many non-binary people. This screening, making it more accessible for those who face barriers, moves it to a place where people can access it if they're rural, and from what I've heard from people as well, also reduces trauma for people who have previously experienced. 99% of cervical cancers are caused by high-risk HPV, and this is why we've also recently announced that we're expanding access to the HPV vaccine to males born in 2005, which will help reduce infection rates amongst people of all genders. The cervical cancer self-screening expansion program is just one of the ways we're working to improve cancer prevention and treatment in BC. In 2023, we launched BC's Cancer Care Action Plan, which outlines the key actions our government is taking to meaningfully reduce cancer rates and improve patient health outcomes over the next 10 years. Breast cancer screening improvements are an important area of women's health, which is why BC's Cancer Care Action Plan includes a commitment to expand breast brachytherapy and interprovincial planning for proton therapy treatment. Honourable Speaker, something I hear about at least weekly is our government's action to provide free contraception and IUDs. British Columbia is the first jurisdiction in North America to provide universal free contraceptives to all residents. This program is a significant step forward in women's health and the health care of anyone who can become pregnant. There is so much more that I can describe, Mr. Speaker, from coverage to in vitro fertilization, to gender-affirming care, collaboration and action in maternal health and midwifery, and work specifically on Indigenous women's health, but I don't have time to canvass it all. I will, however, touch on a huge threat to women's health, which is gender-based violence. Gender-based violence is a prevalent issue in our province, which can lead to a myriad of adverse health outcomes, including physical, mental, and sexual health. This is a public health issue. Our government has taken significant steps in meaningfully addressing gender-based violence through the Safe and Supported Provincial Gender-Based Violence Action Plan. As part of the action plan, we're investing more than $60 million each year for gender-based violence supports and service. It is critical that we continue to take action to address women's health and support systems, access, and participation. Honourable Speaker, this motion brought by the opposition is an important topic that I hope we can debate frankly. Because despite needs and ideas passionately expressed by members opposite, past actions have been drastically and damagingly contrary to the holistic health and well-being of women. What kinds of actions am I talking about? When in government, the opposition removed the requirement for cabinet submissions to be evaluated under a gender lens. They scrapped pay equity legislation, they cut BC NDP's childcare program, they eliminated the Women's Equality Ministry, they cut legal aid by 40%, laid off victim service workers, the people who help sexual assault and domestic violence victims through torturous criminal trials. They eliminated the funding for BC's 37 women's centres. A quote from Jack Thornburg, chair of the Council of Canadians in 2003, said, "This government attacks women's services and women's health and thus also attacks children. None of us, even Liberals, voted for that." Honourable Speaker, I think it's clear that our government understands that there is more work to be done. And I don't just mean more work to clean up the damage that was done by the Leader of the Opposition and his party when they were in government, but more work to build on the significant actions we have already taken to continue to focus as a government to address women's health. As part of that work, as I see it, we also have to stand up against harmful cuts and policy decisions and those who would repeat them, or worse, at the expense of women if they were given the option. Thank you.
Thank you, Member. Member for Caribou North.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise to address a matter of profound significance, the crisis in women's health and particularly how it impacts our seniors. The crisis demands the immediate action of this NDP government. And our BC United Caucus are concerned by this government's inability to deliver the services that people need. Healthcare should be equally accessed to all British Columbians, and in reality, it's not. This NDP government's failure to address inadequate seniors' care, the shortage of family doctors, and funding insufficiencies that have burdened seniors in our province. While all British Columbians are experiencing a soaring cost of living, a crumbling healthcare system, and an out-of-control housing crisis, the impact on our senior women is particularly significant. Seniors are the backbone of our province, and they deserve respect. However, we continue to witness under this government seniors failing to be adequately cared for and accessing the services that they rely on. While all seniors are impacted by these crises, we know that women are disproportionately impacted by these issues. In addition to these systemic challenges, senior women bear an additional weight of caregiving, resource insecurity, and isolation more than their male counterparts. Notably, almost a quarter of all seniors find themselves providing care to family members or friends with a long-term condition, and 40% of women are more likely than men to offer both paid and unpaid care to children or adults facing long-term conditions. My mom was one of these incredible women, and I saw the impact that it took on her health. As well, poverty rates among elderly women tend to be highest amongst women, especially widows. And it's getting worse under this government. This burden is magnified in our rural areas, where senior women face even greater challenges due to the shortage of medical resources and access issues. 17% of rural seniors find themselves without access to a family doctor or nurse practitioner. Additionally, the shortage of acute care beds is stark in rural regions, with 70% fewer beds per 1,000 people than their urban counterparts. Yes, I said 70%. This shortage not only leads to longer stays in alternative care, but also requires senior women in rural areas to travel extensively for necessary medical attention. I've met with so many women who have loved ones in the hospital, and the impacts it's taking on them as they wait months upon months upon months upon months to access necessary long-term care beds. And this disproportionately impacts women in our rural communities. Under this NDP government, seniors are simply being left behind. Programs like the Shelter Aid for Elderly Renters or SAFER are significantly underfunded and fail to meet the basic needs of people across this province. Currently, seniors living in Vancouver are spending over 60% of their income on rent, and many seniors are struggling to find affordable housing, even with the benefit from the SAFER program. Particularly alarming is the impact on single senior women who are disproportionately affected by SAFER's shortcomings as they are more likely than men to have a lower income. When senior women lack stable living conditions, grapple with limited incomes, or struggle to afford necessary medications, their health is significantly impacted. Clearly, more needs to be done. This government is failing our seniors, and I plead with this government to please prioritize the health and well-being of senior women in this province.
Thank you, Member. Member for Nelson Creston.
Thank you, Speaker. I am absolutely thrilled to be able to speak on the actions that our government is taking on supporting women and gender diverse people, particularly in terms of healthcare. So as I was thinking about this topic, I thought I would come up with my top 10 list of favorite actions that we are taking. This is significant leadership actions, and I am delighted that the Minister of Health is here so we can celebrate the actions that he, our Premier, and our government is collectively taking to support women. Number one, free birth control. We are the first jurisdiction across North America to offer free birth control. We are also offering free IUD and cervical anesthetic. The abortion pill is now free. We offer free home HPV cervical screening, and we are also expanding the HPV vaccine. We are now going to be providing free IVF treatment. We are also improving maternal health. We are expanding midwifery in BC. We are supporting gender-based violence. And number 10 is we are the first jurisdiction in Western Canada to offer gender-affirming surgery. So this is the top 10 things that our government is doing. And when I look across Canada and I look to the south, I am very concerned that we could go backwards. And especially when I look at the actions of the current leader of the opposition, these are the top 10 actions that they took for women. First, they removed gender-based analysis from cabinet submissions. What does that mean? That means every cabinet submission, you used to have to look through a gender lens to determine how this was going to impact women and diverse people. They didn't think that was important, so they scrapped that. And that is every government decision. Thank goodness we now have that again. They scrapped pay equity legislation. They scrapped pay equity legislation. Shame. They cut BC NDP's childcare program.
Members, one member has the floor. You will have your opportunity to speak later in this debate. Member for Nelson Creston.
They also cut legal aid by 40%. Now they also laid off victim services workers. Shame. They eliminated funding for women's centers. They rolled back wages for the lowest paid healthcare workers with a new HEU contract, saying that those workers were not valued as part of our healthcare teams. They cut welfare for single mothers. They welcome social conservatives. The leader of their party says they welcome social conservatives. Now, these are people that fundamentally do not support women. My favorite action that the leader of the opposition took was actually pointing a finger gun at me during question period. That's the type of leadership that this opposition, they're hoping to become government. We can absolutely not let that happen. Our government is taking action to support people, to support women and gender diverse people across British Columbia. And we cannot go back. We cannot afford to go back. This is a human rights issue. This is a gender equity issue. This is a health issue. Thank you, Speaker.
Member for Kelowna Mission.
Well, Chair, I reserve my right to raise a question of privilege related to that speech there. I'm going to fact check the entire thing and bring back the actual truth.
Member for Surrey South.
Well, thank you, Honourable Speaker. I'm not sure how any member of this government could stand up and celebrate when the head of obstetrics and gynecology at Surrey Memorial Hospital says that under this government, women are actually in danger. And I'll get to those facts a little bit later. And, you know, speaking of facts, I just find it very disappointing to see that the member from Nelson Crescent had very few facts in her actual speech this morning. But I'm here to rise to speak to this motion and to speak to a very important issue in fertility treatment, and that's in vitro fertilization, known as IVF. This government has finally decided to announce support for this critical treatment. The BC United Caucus has been calling for funding for this critical program for 2 years. In fact, if you go to my Facebook, I got receipts. You'll see one of my campaign videos from 2022. Unfortunately, like many NDP government announcements, it actually isn't funded. And it's not expected to be funded for at least a year. So this is an issue that I have personal experience with. In 2010, I was diagnosed with a fertility issue, and it was determined that the only option for my spouse and I to have a child was through IVF. I was 35. I began the treatment at the Pacific Centre for Reproductive Medicine here in Burnaby, BC, and I was fortunate to be able to produce a significant number of healthy eggs. And I was blessed to give birth to my first son in 2011. Well, thank you. In 2013, my spouse and I decided that we would try to have another baby, and we went through another round of IVF, this time age 38. I produced less than half the eggs that I did just 3 years prior, and I asked my doctor, what happened? And he just told me straight up, you got older. The reality is, of this women's fertility issue, that a biological clock is real. And the reality is that this government's failure to fund IVF means that while our premier is stuck in analysis paralysis, there are British Columbians who will age out of the program before it even begins. With every month that goes by, their dreams of giving birth to their own child diminishes. Other provinces in Canada have been funding IVF for years. In fact, Quebec began its program in 2010. La Belle Province has studied age factors and other considerations and refined its legislation over the past 14 years. Ontario funding IVF since 2015. So why is it that BC is always the outlier? Why are the NDP content with letting people's dreams of parenthood slip away? Clearly, this government doesn't see this as a real, urgent priority. This is a procedure that's already being done in BC, and all it would take is this government to create a billing code to make it a reality today. Another sad reality is that for many women, they're going to need more than one treatment to conceive, and that's even if they can fund one treatment in the first place. As Carolyn Dubé, Executive Director of Family Matters Canada says, quote, IVF will remain out of reach for many people under a provincial funding plan because they still have to pay out of pocket before recouping expenses, end quote. Let me just skip ahead here because I just also want to mention that women are in danger in this province right now as a result of a lack of funding in healthcare. And I'm talking about a promise to fund expansions to Surrey Memorial Hospital. This was a promise made multiple times by our current health minister, and yet when we look at this year's budget, there is no funding for the expansion at Surrey Memorial Hospital. Okay? This comes after urgent outcry from doctors, including the head of gynecology and obstetrics from Surrey Memorial, talking about a fact that they've had to divert women and send them home because there's no place to give them a room while they're in labor. And in fact, sending women home who are dilated further than they ever had have sent them home in years past. So let's not forget the story of Harnish Hoti, who in June 2023 was forced to give birth in her car because she was turned away. Can you imagine the terror of not knowing what will happen to you or your baby? Reflecting on the experience, she said, quote, this was a horrible experience. We were all in shock at the time. What will happen next? Is the baby going to be okay? Will I be okay? No expectant mother should be forced to go through these conditions, and this government's lack of care is having these types of repercussions. It's not just about a lack of staff. Women are bleeding to death and having to receive blood transfusions because they can't receive gynecological surgeries due to a lack of suites. We need a government that will prioritize women's health and seek to deliver better services so they don't have to go through this broken healthcare system. A BC United government will listen to the voices of women, doctors and nurses and deliver better access to medical care for women in our province. Thank you.
Member for Richmond, Queensborough.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the role of government is to be ever vigilant and to strive for better. So, of course, we will always do more, and that's exactly what this government has been doing since 2017. Health is an all-encompassing and does not stop at what a doctor deals with. Economic realities, social pressures also affect health. Our province continues to make impactful investments to health, to address inequities in British Columbia's healthcare system and society, and to promote gender equity in society in general. That's how you deal with health. Those are meaningful steps that we have taken and will continue to take. Every single decision that this government makes is viewed and analyzed through a diversity and equity lens to ensure that we take care of everyone in the province and don't leave behind people that have historically been left behind, including women. That's in stark contrast to what happened when the members opposite made those decisions. One of the first things they did was to remove the requirement for cabinet submissions to be evaluated under a gender lens. My friend spoke about it eloquently. This was implemented by the BC NDP government in the 1990s. What that did was just amplify and reinforce the discriminatory status quo that had existed, effectively marginalizing women. They scrapped pay equity legislation. There was a whole bunch of kerfuffle over there. I'll point them to the Human Rights Code Amendment Act of 2001. It's there in black and white. Just think of where we would have been as a society had they not done that. They cut BC NDP's childcare program. You know, Mr. Speaker, we attend a lot of events and announcements as representatives, and one of the most memorable ones that I was at was in Richmond at the Jewish Day School. It was a childcare announcement. The Premier was there, the Prime Minister was there, and a young engineer. She was there, she spoke. She imparted how truly transforming the childcare assistance that she was now able to get for her 2 children was for her and for her family. She was able to return to work and do what she was educated and trained for. You could literally feel the greater sense of empowerment she now had. Her mental health was better. Again, I wonder where we would have been as a society were it not for the deep regressive cuts that were made before. They literally eliminated, let me say this, literally eliminated the Women's Equality Ministry. What more can you say than that? Well, actually, you can say more than that. They were the architects of the largest layoff of women, mostly women of color, in North America in one shot with their actions against the lowest paid workers in healthcare. If you care about people's health, you care about the people that work in healthcare. Our government reversed that. The impact to families of that decision to their mental and physical health is unimaginable. We here in this House have several of those people whose families suffered as a result of that decision. Mr. Speaker, I was a young lawyer just starting out in 1999. I took legal aid cases at that point. In the next few years, it was a pretty good system that had been set up in the last few years, starting in the early 90s. In the next few years, I saw legal aid decimated and cut by 40%. Victim service workers, the people who help rape and domestic violence victims throughout criminal trials were fired. They eliminated funding for BC's 37 women's centers, actions that hurt women's mental and physical health. There's so much more of what happened that was wrong, but I want to focus on some of what our government has done. My colleagues have spoken about it. Just last month, we announced funding for the in vitro fertilization. No one should be denied, Mr. Speaker, the opportunity to have a child because of how much money they make, who they love, and whether they have a partner. However, many people in BC can't conceive without this help, so we stepped in. My friend opposite spoke about, Quebec bringing this forward in 2010 and Ontario in 2015. I just kind of want to warn them that that side was in power during that time. Anyways, British Columbia is the first jurisdiction in North America to provide universal free contraception to all residents of British Columbia. This program is a significant step forward in women's health care and health care of anyone who can become pregnant. All of this work was done closely with the doctors of BC and BC family doctors to determine the appropriate changes needed to contraceptive fees and improve the fee-for-service compensation. My friend also spoke about the HPV self-screening, really revolutionary, we all know that early screening of cancer is crucial. I'm running out of time, but I did want to speak about childcare. Again, transformative.
Thank you, member. Member for Richmond North Centre.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. All of us in this room should be able to recognize that our province is experiencing a healthcare crisis. We have a shortage of healthcare professionals. 1 in 5 British Columbians don't have a family doctor, and our walk-in clinic wait times are the worst in the country. This is not news to us, and this crisis continues to affect every single resident of BC. We also know that the crisis does not affect everyone equally. Marginalized groups such as women, but also racialized people, Indigenous people, and immigrants often face additional barriers to accessing safe and culturally sensitive care. Women's health must be viewed through an intersectional lens. While all women share similar challenges in accessing healthcare, our diverse backgrounds and experience mean we each face unique obstacles. I would like to share a personal story to highlight the urgent need for cultural sensitive care in our province. My late husband and I, together with our 7-year-old daughter, immigrated from Hong Kong to BC in 1989 and joined by my parents 2 years later. As they got older, they required additional care, as many seniors do. My parents lived in Hong Kong for most of their lives. They did not speak English, and they were from a different culture and a different time. When it became clear that they would need to be placed in a long-term care home, the options were extremely limited. These care homes are hard enough to get into as it is, and there is only one long-term care home in Chinatown that offers services for Chinese British Columbians in their first language and in line with their cultural norms, providing traditional Chinese meals. This is the only care home of its kind in all of the Lower Mainland, and my parents were not able to get in until towards the end of their lives. Instead, I was forced to send them to a mainstream long-term care home in New Westminster, where the condition gradually deteriorated due to a lack of cultural sensitive care. Both my parents passed away during the pandemic at the age of 98, and while they lived long, happy lives, I wonder if things would have been different had they had access to the cultural sensitive care they required. My parents' story illustrates the importance of language justice in healthcare, especially for immigrants and seniors. While most new immigrants in BC today speak English, it can still be difficult to convey complex medical issues in a non-native language. Our healthcare system should serve all British Columbians, and BC is an incredibly diverse province. 29% of British Columbians are immigrants, and 17% do not speak English or French as their first language. When it comes to healthcare, miscommunication due to language barriers can be life-threatening. In addition to language, things like social norms, family values, gender roles, diet, and cultural or spiritual beliefs and practices could all serve as barriers, highlighting the need for greater access to culturally safe care in our province. And it's particularly important for women who are already more likely to face barriers in the healthcare system. Cultural sensitive healthcare is not just important for immigrants, but for many marginalized groups, including racialized and indigenous individuals and communities. Reports like In Plain Sight have exposed the systemic racism that still exists within our healthcare system. And yet, 4 years after the report's release, this NDP government has not taken the necessary action to remedy this. Indigenous women specifically have some of the worst health outcomes out of any groups in BC. This is absolutely unacceptable. Healthcare is a human right, and we all should have the right to access this care in a way that is culturally sensitive. The diversity of our province and the people who live here must be accommodated and considered in our system. Right now, people, particularly women and gender-diverse British Columbians, are falling through the cracks, and it's time for this NDP government to step up to provide equitable health care for everyone in our province. Thank you.
Thank you, Member. Member for Courtney Comox.
Honourable Speaker, I rise to the motion to speak to the motion put forward by the member from Prince George Valemount and thank her for the opportunity to talk about how government investments can provide the best health care we can for British Columbia's women and gender-diverse people. I know that discoveries continue to give us new ways to help people live their best lives. I also know that our government continues to make important health investments to take advantage of providing the best care we can in a public health system. And I know that that includes addressing inequities in British Columbia's healthcare system to promote gender equity. There's a broader precursor to good health too. The social determinants of health are reflective of all that government could tackle to improve health. So what have we done? Well, we reintroduced a robust GBA+, that's Gender-Based Analysis Plus, back into government after a gender lens requirement for cabinet submissions was removed by the previous government. We're ensuring every government initiative advances more equity for women and gender-diverse people, including in health measures. Income reflects women's and gender-diverse people's health. We reintroduced and are advancing childcare to become a core service that women and primary caregivers can rely on to be able to join the workforce and provide for their families. This, after a decade and a half of falling behind after the previous government's cut of a growing, safe and affordable childcare program. Along with childcare, minimum wage has been raised to be more reflective of making ends meet after the previous government did things like introducing a training wage lower than minimum wage. Imagine today's new women workers having to accept a 25% wage lower than the minimum. Social vulnerability is another determinant of health. We have brought back sexual assault centres cut by the previous government. We're supporting survivors of gender-based violence, which is so prevalent in BC. Increased rates of depression, PTSD, brain injuries, sexually transmitted diseases, unwanted pregnancies and pregnancy complications, and tragically, sometimes death. These are all bad health outcomes that could be avoided or mitigated with proper supports. And that's what we're doing. Let's also look at some of the direct health initiatives our government has undertaken to improve the lives of women and gender-diverse people. Reproductive health is being supported with free access to contraception, an abortion drug that preempts surgery, gender-affirming surgery for trans people that's closer to home. Take-home HPV tests for cervical cancer screening, and a single cycle of in vitro fertilization. I'd like to share the words of Tasha. She wrote about how incredibly amazing she thinks the funded IVF announcement is. She went through the agony that is experienced by 1 in 6 Canadians and how IVF can overcome the debilitating circumstances of infertility. She says, the heartbreak and unpredictability of infertility can be all-consuming when you're in the middle of it, but every single doctor's appointment, invasive procedure, and all the tears were worth it when I got to see my boys' little faces and have the privilege of watching them grow up. Maternal health is an important priority for our government. Last year, capital investments began expansions to the Burnaby Hospital redevelopment and the expansion of Caribou Memorial Hospital to respond to maternity and women's health needs in those regions. We're expanding the midwifery program with 70% more seats at UBC for new entrants and internationally trained midwives. When I had my kids, midwifery was illegal. Today, more and more choose a midwife, especially here in BC. In our cancer care strategy, we're taking meaningful actions to reduce cancer rates and increase health outcomes. We added $440 million in 2023, and Budget 24 would add a further $270 million. One example is supporting timely breast cancer care while we build capacity at home. Better than long wait times for treatment and greater risk of poor outcomes. As always, there's more to do, especially in healthcare, and speaking in this House previously, I have highlighted the contributions that women have made in this House. Contributions that help change the lives of women. It's clear that the strength of 29 women on government side and also a majority of women in cabinet is showing how the voice of women has and will continue to be acted on. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member. Member for West Vancouver, Capilano.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This motion is about women's health. So why am I going to spend my entire time right now talking about childcare, or to be more specific, the lack of childcare, or the childcare desert in British Columbia created under this NDP government? I'm deeply concerned about the state of women's health, particularly the stress they endure due to adequate childcare provisions. BC is far behind on its promise to create childcare spaces, let alone $10 per day. And what is worse is that this NDP government is not only not creating additional spaces, we are losing childcare spaces in British Columbia, with the biggest casualty being infant to toddler spaces. So we can listen to the sound clips from the NDP government over and over. The reality is there are 10,000 less children in childcare this year since the NDP have formed government. The NDP's inability to deliver on their signature election promise of $10 a day is evident. Less than 10% of the promised childcare spaces are offered at that pledged $10 a day rate. So of those lucky enough to even find childcare, 9 out of 10 of those families are unfairly deprived of the affordable childcare they were assured in successive elections. This is another example, Mr. Speaker, of this government spending more and doing less. Studies have shown that gender roles and expectations place additional burdens on women in accessing health care due to a lack of appropriate, available, and affordable childcare. A 2022 Kaiser survey found that 24% of women could not find time to go to the doctor, 23% could not take time off work, and 14% of women missed or delayed their own health care because of a lack of childcare. It places immense stress on women. Juggling work and childcare without adequate support can lead to heightened levels of stress and anxiety, disrupted sleep patterns, irregular exercise routines, and compromised nutrition. These factors contribute to physical health challenges, including chronic conditions. So lack of affordable childcare options force women to make career sacrifices, such as reducing working hours or leaving the workforce altogether. And contrary to the NDP's false claim that accessible childcare has contributed to more than 100,000 women joining the workforce since 2017, the reality paints a starkly different picture. Under this NDP's tenure, the labor force participation rate for women has dropped by 1.5%, and the employment rate has fallen by 2% for women in British Columbia. Now, these are not mere fluctuations. They signify a decline in women's share of the workforce amidst a childcare crisis. Here's a quote from a February CBC story. Quote, "Each month, Natasha Hartston pulls out her spreadsheet of licensed childcare facilities in Kamloops, BC, where she and her family live, and starts calling around to see if she can get her daughter into one of them," unquote. Can you imagine how stressful that is? And there are many more women like Natasha out there. Last fall, along with the MLA for Skeena, I met with a group of parents in Terrace to talk about the childcare desert they are facing in more rural communities. A doctor and a paramedic, both moms, told us they had reduced shifts due to the inability to get childcare. Most childcare providers are women. It's still the fact, so I don't want to forget the impact that this has on childcare providers and the women that work in childcare centers. This provincial government is unable to get the money out the door that is provided to them, hundreds of millions of dollars from the federal government, yet they are unable to get proper funding out to these childcare providers, causing stress, anxiety, women losing sleep because they don't know if government is actually going to come through and pay the fees that they're committed to pay. So government is sitting on money they can't seem to spend. We owe it to women and families to acknowledge the failures of the current childcare system and demand meaningful action from this NDP government. 7 years after this NDP government promise, it continues to fail women in British Columbia and has fallen behind all other provinces in meeting its childcare commitments, particularly now the wage grid. So it is a fact that the lack of appropriate and affordable childcare has negative impacts on women's health, and this government better do better. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For Warner and Monashee.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and welcome. It is an honor to work with many amazing women in our government's caucus who work hard to support our government's work to invest in women's health care. And I'm glad that now opposition is also talking about childcare, because before there was a disconnect understanding health and the factors, contributing factors of impacting health, social determinants of health. Music to my ear, finally hearing about childcare when there is a proof that in 2017 and 2020, when I ran provincially, both opposition candidates of the time, one at the CBC, recorded interview, one during all candidates debate, said childcare is not even possible when I was speaking for childcare and our government's plan. So it's good to that tides are shifting. So our government continues to make impactful investments in healthcare in general and with focus to address the inequities in BC's healthcare system, as well as to promote gender equity. As highlighted, spoken by many of my colleagues, I want to share some of the investments as we're also making investments, but I want to share one quote by a senior in my constituency, Lila. She sent me a reply to one of the email I sent to help her. She said, I quote, "Thank you, well done for accurate information. I was put on a wait list with primary care clinic, was given name by IHA social worker, and I met with nurse practitioner who is now my medical person. All this in December. This thrill of a lifetime is giving my friend the same name. She called, got taken in right away, and double exclamation mark. I used walk-in clinic for several years, brought my records to my new doctor, who was delighted. It was stressful being renovated, threatened, and with homelessness. And God bless Leslie McCullough. I am at $900, not $1,300. So she talks about the senior housing second phase that we supported in Vernon, Monashee. Bless the government that believes in people. I was finally able to get my teeth fixed. I support the NDP with much gratitude, end quote. So these are the impacts of investments we make. And we have in 2023, Mr. Speaker, we've launched BC's Cancer Care Plan, which outlines the key actions of our government's will to take meaningfully reduce cancer rates and improve patient health outcomes in the next 10 years. We're expanding on the initial $440 million investment announced in 2023 through Budget 2024 and investing additional $270 million in ensuring that patients get the health care and supports they need. As many talked about, the HPV cervical cancer screening program. Self-screening does remove many barriers and obstacles, such as cultural barriers, history of trauma, the need for transportation, childcare, and booking time off work, and traditional testing. BC is now the first province or territory in Canada to offer a cervix self-screening option, and one of the first province or territories to transition to HPV testing for cervical cancer screening. Breast cancer screening improvements are an important area of women's health, which is why BC's cancer care plan includes commitment to expand breast care, brachytherapy, and interprovincial planning for proton therapy. It's reassuring to hear all members of this House talking about this. I still remember encouraging remarks from the member from West Vancouver, Capilano, to our BC NDP government's former premier during 2022 UBCM in Whistler after an event, and during the introduction of newly elected member from South Surrey, where member thanked Premier's investments and support for the BC Cancer Agency and how grateful she was to get the great care during her journey, which is also commendable. And we'll talk about, of course, we're the first province to cover the contraceptives. And we get so many positive messages. But I want to share a message from Savannah, who also very encouraged, and sent me a message saying, thank you for being the part of the progressive government, where I am saving $373 for my birth control prescription. And she shared this slip of her prescription. So that's the kind of work we're doing, Mr. Speaker. And women's health is more than just health. It includes mental health. It includes their well-being, keeping them safe from the violence and gender-based violence. And that's the work we need to do and will continue to do and will continue to make on the progress we've made so far. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. Noting the hour.
No, it's okay. Please, thank you. Member for Kelowna Mission.
Thank you much, Honourable Speaker. In September of 2022, a friend received alarming news from her doctor. A test revealed abnormal cells necessitating an immediate biopsy. She called me because, contrary to the expected 2-week wait, 3 months elapsed before the procedure, which ultimately confirmed cancer. Initially informed of a minor emergency surgery that was to be scheduled within weeks, she then faced repeated postponements over 5 months. These delays disrupted her family life, leading to ultimately job loss. But worse yet, when the surgery finally occurred, it was significantly more invasive than it would have been had it been performed when it should have. This is just one example of how poorly women with cancer are treated in BC. Over the last 7 years, it's become painfully clear that the needs of British Columbian women, especially those battling cancer, have been ignored. Despite promises, there was no mention of improving access to cancer specialists or oncology services in the 2024 budget. No funding for vital infrastructure like the Kamloops or Nanaimo cancer centers to get care closer to home, and a deafening silence on addressing the urgent need for expanded cancer care services. This negligence is not just disappointing, it's dangerous. Our cancer care system was best in class 10 years ago and #1 in outcomes, but it has deteriorated to the point of becoming an international embarrassment under the NDP. And it's worse for women. Stories have emerged of women being directed to medically assisted death because they cannot access timely treatment. Women getting surgery for cancer but being put on wait lists to get on the wait list to see a gynecologic oncologist. Only 20% of cancer patients referred to an oncologist are seen within the recommended 2 weeks, compared to 75% in Ontario. The mean wait time for a first consultation with an oncologist has increased to 43 days, which is a 43% increase. The wait time for cervical cancer screening results in BC is 6 months. With only 8 gynecologic oncologists, British Columbia has the fewest of these subspecialties of any province in Canada. Average wait times for gynecological cancer specialist access at Vancouver General Hospital reached 99% out of range of the benchmark. And I'll quote from the Globe and Mail, from April to June, just 4.7% of patients with endometrial cancer on BC's mainland were able to have surgery within the target timeline of 8 weeks from diagnosis. Only 3.9% of patients with grade 1 and 2 tumors were able to have surgery within the target time of 6 weeks from referral, while no patients with grade 3 tumors were able to have surgery within the target time of 4 weeks from referral, end quote.
Noting the hour,
Women taking
member.
7 months to get breast cancer diagnosis, women choosing to travel to the US for surgery because they won't get treatment in time, but only if they can afford it. British Columbian women deserve
Noting the hour,
better.
member.
It's time for this government to step up to prioritize women's health and to end this crisis once and for all, before anyone else dies. Thank you, Honourable Speaker.
Noting the
hour, I will move to
Member, you heard the motion to adjourn the debate. All those in favour say aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Government House Leader.
I move the House to now adjourn.
Member, you heard the motion to adjourn the House. All those in favour? Opposed? Motion carried. This House stands adjourned until 1:30 p.m. this afternoon.